I still remember the sound of the door that night. It wasn't loud. It didn't slam. It just clicked shut. Funny how something that soft could split a life in two. That was the night Mia left. 3 years of love. 6 years of friendship. 10,000 little moments that suddenly meant nothing. She said she needed more. More adventure. More spark. More of everything I wasn't. And I believed her. Like and subscribe for more stories. For months after, I tried to find what she meant by more. I joined a gym I hated. Bought cologne I couldn't stand. Started posting fake smiles online because everyone said that's what healing looked like. But inside, I was just noise. A man pretending to move on while quietly hoping the door would open again. The truth is, I wasn't angry at her. Not really. I was angry that I let myself shrink for love. That I mistook peace for boredom. That I thought giving her everything would make her stay. When she walked away, I realized something cruel. Love built on fear always collapses. The first real shift came one morning in June. I was standing in front of the mirror, toothbrush in hand, staring at a face that looked older than it should. And I remember thinking, if I don't rebuild myself now, I'll spend my life waiting for someone who already left. So I did something simple. I stopped trying to be impressive. I went back to work with focus, took a small project no one wanted, and poured myself into it. I stayed late, not out of desperation, but because it felt good to care again. I started walking home instead of driving. The air did something to me, slowed my thoughts, reminded me that quiet isn't emptiness. On weekends, I cooked again. Real food, not noodles or takeout. I'd played it like it mattered. It was stupid, maybe, but it made me feel human again. Bit by bit, I built a life where her name didn't echo through the walls anymore. A year passed. Then, one evening, out of nowhere, I got a message. Mia mentioned you today, a mutual friend wrote. She said you seem different. I smiled. Not the bitter kind, the real kind. Because she was right. I wasn't the man she left. By the second year, my small project had turned into something bigger. Clients started calling me directly. I was leading a team now, people who actually looked up to me. And with that came something I didn't expect. Peace. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything. I wasn't chasing more anymore. I was content with enough. It's strange how life circles back. Last month I got an invitation. Mia was getting married. For a moment, I just stared at it. Not because I wanted her back. That chapter was dead, but because some small, buried part of me wanted to know if I'd finally let go. So I went. The wedding was beautiful, in that polished, picture-perfect kind of way. String lights, white chairs, laughter echoing off marble. I saw her across the garden. Hair curled, dress flowing like she'd stepped out of a dream. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the man she outgrew. I felt like someone who had survived the storm and learned to breathe in the calm. When she noticed me, her eyes widened just a little. A polite smile. A quick hug. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice trembled just slightly, the way people sound when they're not sure who they're talking to anymore. And I realized something right there under the fairy lights. I had become everything I once wanted her to see in me. Later that night, I stepped outside. The music was soft. The air smelled of roses and rain. I leaned on the railing, watching strangers dance, and thought about how far I'd come from the man staring at a toothbrush, wondering who he was. I think healing is like that. You don't wake up one day over it. You just start choosing yourself quietly until it becomes habit. It's been 3 years now. I live in a smaller apartment, but it feels like home. I still cook on weekends, still take long walks, and every now and then, when I catch my reflection, I nod at the man staring back. He's not perfect, not impressive, but he's real. And maybe that's what more was supposed to mean all along. They said revenge rarely looks like the movies. I think they meant the loud stuff, the wild plots you see on screen where someone bursts into a boardroom and rips off a mask. Maybe that happens. Maybe it works for some people. This wasn't that. I wanted the kind of revenge that could be worn to a dinner, discussed politely over coffee, survived a background check, and still stood up in court if it had to. Cold, precise, impeccable. After Mia's wedding, I went home and opened my laptop. I did what I always did when I needed to be honest with myself. I put things in order. Not the petty things. The ledger kind of order. The kind where you list out debts and credits and see exactly who owes what. That night I wrote down everything she had taken from me. Not things you can put on a police report. Little thefts of time, reputations, opportunities. The ways she rewrote my actions in her version of the story until people believed the new truth. You can rage about that for a while, or you can build something better on top of it. I chose the latter. Step 1 was obvious. Public humiliation without leverage is just noise. I needed leverage, real leverage. So I started quietly. Meetings with my lawyer, conversations with people I trusted from the old projects. I called on favors I had earned by showing up and being competent when it mattered. I hired a private investigator to dig into the inconsistencies of stories she told investors and the narrative she'd sold to the press. To be honest, part of me loved watching the map of her life become a document. It felt like cataloging a crime. What I found wasn't gore. It was things, small and cumulative, promises to partners that weren't kept, an R&D budget that mysteriously rerouted, intellectual property filed under shell names, clients who thought they were funding product development only to discover their money had gone into lifestyle perks and unapologetic vanity metrics. Nothing that would make tabloid headlines on its own, but the pattern was ugly. It pointed to intent and to years of manipulation. Intent plus pattern plus paper creates pressure. Pressure can force a confession, or it opens a door for a boardroom change. I didn't rush. That was the first rule. Patience is part of cruelty when used justly. I watched her moves for months. She had a new startup, a new brand, and a husband who was a warm, broad-shouldered presence in every photograph. He smiled at cameras and posted supportive captions. He was also a major investor. That created a vulnerability. Investors hate the unknown. They hate the risk of reputational damage. They hate being wrong in public. So I fed the unknown, not with lies, with questions, with carefully placed facts. I reached out to a journalist I respected and offered access to the documents we'd compiled. I contacted an investor in her round, an older man who remembered working the kind of deals people call risky in private and visionary in hindsight. I did not show emotion. I let the documents speak, and they told a story of diverted funds and friendly contracts that sat like loose threads. Threads that, when you pull, unravel the seam. You learn a lot about people watching how they handle a threat. Mia doubled down. She posted more, smiled brighter, promised new launches with theatrical trailers. Her PR machine started churning. I watched her team spin. There is a brutality in the PR world that is elegant in its own way. I respect craft when it is craft, but spin is not steel. Spin collapses when pressure is applied to the right places. The investor I'd spoken with did something I hadn't expected. He called a private meeting with other major backers. They met in an unadorned room on the 23rd floor of a glass building downtown. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. The people who can act without spectacle are the ones who terrify the showy. They are the quiet ones who move money like chess pieces. By the time the meeting leaked, because these things always leak, the narrative had already shifted. The leak was small, surgical. Concerns about governance, the note said. Request for audit. An audit looks boring on the outside. It takes time. It is procedural. In the middle of the procedure, reputations fray. People get nervous. Board members call their lawyers. Employers hush public statements. Investors pull staff from PR and put them on damage control. If you time it right, you can watch a house of cards built on charisma wobble. I timed it. The audit was announced 2 days before she was scheduled to appear on a primetime panel about female founders and leadership. Perfect optics. The night before her public appearance, a press release slipped out about a voluntary accounting review. She smiled on stage the next day as if nothing had happened. Anyone who has ever performed in front of cameras knows that practiced calm. I watched her deliver the talking points I had once taught her to avoid. The ones that make people sound hollow. We are confident. We are cooperating fully. This is a minor setback. A setback. That word felt cheap as bone. Within a week, the audit found inconsistencies. Not spectacular theft, not the sort of thing the police would take seriously in a knockdown drag-out legal sense. But enough. Enough for investors to demand immediate board oversight and to freeze discretionary spending. Enough for a hedge fund that had been flirting with her seed round to go ghost. Enough for her husband to start asking quieter questions. Not in public, but in the freighted voice of someone recalculating risk. She came to me then. That part surprised some people. It did not surprise me. People return to comfortable hosts when the storm hits. I met her at a small cafe she used to like before she learned to curate life into an aesthetic. She looked tired in the way that performance makes people look. The eyes were the giveaway. She asked for a private conversation, and I agreed because I think certain truths are best heard unfiltered. I didn't expect you to be here, she said. Her words wobble. Old habits of control are thin when fear sits at the table. I didn't expect to be asked for help, I said. Short sentences, like placing a coin on the table. What do you want, Mia? She inhaled. I thought maybe you could advise me. You've always had a good head for things. Maybe you could talk to the board. Help with damage control. Tell them this is a speed bump. I looked at her. I could see the old arguments. Charm, tears, gratitude as a return on investment. I could have softened. I could have said yes and steered her toward a private solution that kept her career intact. She asked me to lie by omission. It would have been easy to take the moral high ground and help. But the ledger in my head was not just about money or reputation. It was about patterns. You had every chance to be honest, I said. You chose otherwise. You chose to spin and to compartmentalize. You chose to make people part of your story when they trusted you. She flinched, as if I had said something crude. Her voice cracked. It's not all black and white. We made hard choices to keep the company alive. You know how it is. I know how it is, I said. We were different in how we handled it. I could have smoothed it with a gentle phrase about forgiveness. I could have driven a wedge into the narrative that let her crawl back to safety. Instead, I handed her the thing I had been saving for the right time. Not vengeance cloaked in cruelty. Vengeance that required responsibility. I told her, I'm not your emergency contact anymore. There was a pause long enough to feel like a negotiation. Maybe she thought this was a game. Maybe she thought guilt would make me bend. Maybe she thought I missed her too much to watch her fall. She learned then that I had changed in a way that mattered. The board convened a special session. She asked for concessions and got a conditional agreement. Step back while an independent committee completed a forensic review. Her public image took the sort of hit you can't clean with a glossy statement. Column inches curdled into questions about whether her brand was more narrative than product. A few of her early champions distanced themselves. It was visible. It was precise. And then the bold move, the one act that made people gasp in the way dramatic cinema aims for and rarely achieves. She had a launch scheduled, a new flagship product backed by a celebrity endorsement and a gala. It was designed to drown out the noise, to force a fresh narrative. I attended the gala, not as a lurker, but with purpose. My suit was the same one she had once complimented. My presence was quiet. The venue glittered. The PR machine hummed like a well-oiled engine. At the moment the celebrity was introduced, the lights dipped and the applause swelled. That is when the final piece landed. The audit committee released a public statement at the precise time the lights dimmed, outlining the need for an immediate recall of the flagship product, pending safety verification. The press release was short, clinical. It cited specific batches, specific distribution channels. It named the manufacturing partners. All facts, no dramatic adjectives. The effect, however, was electricity. Within minutes, cameras pivoted, the gala buzzed, and spokespeople were pulled into corners for off-camera statements. Investors started asking questions in real time. Stores removed pre-orders from their sites. That gala, which had been designed to be a rebirth, was turned into a question mark hovering over headlines. She was left standing on a stage where she had intended to walk triumphantly. The public looked at her in a different way, not like someone who had reinvented herself, but like someone the system had finally noticed. Her husband's face registered confusion in a photograph later printed in a dozen outlets. Her PR team worked like firefighters without enough hoses. I did not gloat. I did not stand and point. I felt the small private thing I had wanted. The world recalibrating around truth. The man I had been 3 years earlier would have wanted to shout from rooftops. The man I was now wanted the truth to be clear, tidy, and defensible. What followed was ugly and electric, and legal and human. Investigations, apologies written in legalese, settlements that left reputations bruised, but legal teams satisfied. Her husband publicly stood by her at first, then made decisions in private that became visible in quiet signatures on paper. Friends took sides. People I knew who had been silent came forward with interviews and records. She lost board seats, endorsements, and the carefully curated mirror she had used to measure success. Did I plan for every consequence? No. No one can. The world has a way of surprising you with collateral. There were people who deserved better and people who did not. I thought about the man I used to be and felt the faint, uncomfortable prickle of sympathy for Mia in the middle of my satisfaction. Revenge has a thermal quality. It warms you for a moment and then cools. Months later, after the noise had dulled and the reporters had moved on to fresher scandals, I sat in my kitchen and considered what I had done. I made tea and watched the sun edge across the counter. There was no applause. There was no vindictive roar. There was a quiet that felt like a medicine I had been prescribed by my own conscience. I did not go to her house to watch the fall. I read reports, and once, by accident, a long letter she had written and never sent. It was not a plea. It was not an apology. It was a catalogue of choices and the reasons she had for them. I understood then that revenge had not been about making her suffer, not in the way cruelty does. It was about balance. It was about refusing to be the footnote in someone else's story. In the end, the thing that mattered most was not the public spectacle. It was that I no longer woke to the echo of a door. The space it left had been filled with something slower, a life I had curated for myself, steady and unflashy. My work prospered. People who mattered respected me. I could walk into a room and not feel small. If someone asked me later if I regretted it, I would say this: I regret the harm that rippled out beyond what I intended. I do not regret standing up for truth when it mattered. I do not regret building a life that resisted being edited by someone else's appetite. I think revenge, done well, is not a story about triumph so much as one about reclamation. Maybe that sounds neat. Maybe it sounds selfish. To be honest, parts of it are. I still sometimes imagine a different path where we both grew into better versions of ourselves without fallout. But life rarely grants such tidy endings. It gives you choices. We make the ones we can live with. A year after the gala, a mutual friend invited me to speak at a small university workshop about ethics in entrepreneurship. I accepted. I spoke about boundaries and about the hard work of building something that survives scrutiny. I did not mention Mia. I did not need to. When the students asked about mistakes, I told them the unromantic truth. Do your work, keep your paper trail clean, and choose people who will carry truth with you. The applause afterward was polite. It warmed me in a measured way. I left the stage and walked out into the night, breathing the same cool air I had walked through when I rebuilt myself. The city was alive with small events and whispered plans. I thought about the man who had stood under fragile birthday candles 3 years earlier, and realized this: some fires burn you, others light a path. Revenge had been a chapter. It was an effective one, but it was not the whole book. The rest of my life, the ordinary pages awaited. I closed one door, and for the first time in a long time, I opened another without looking back.